As the laughter faded and the chatter softened, the night took on a more tender tone. The dim golden lights hanging above the hall cast warm shadows across the faces of the once daring explorers, now softened by time and memory. The air was heavy with nostalgia, the kind that made every breath feel like a quiet remembrance of who they used to be. Hank Miller stood at the center of the room, his cane leaning against his leg, his old leather jacket, the same one he'd worn during their first televised expedition, resting proudly on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, gazing around the room at the faces that had shared so many dangers, so many laughs, so many near-death moments. "We were fearless once," he began, his voice trembling, but his words strong. "Do you remember that night in the Sahara? When the sandstorm hit and we thought we'd never make it out?" Linda laughed through tears. "How could I forget? I had sand in my camera for years." The group chuckled, a soft wave of sound that carried both joy and sadness. It was more than a reunion, it was a resurrection of the past, a bridge between who they were and who they had become. Tommy Green, once the youngest of the Globo Hunters, shuffled closer, his hands shaking slightly as he held up an old photograph. "This was us," he said, showing the group the faded image. In it, they stood in front of the Amazon River, soaked from the rain, grinning like children who had just discovered the edge of the world. They looked invincible. "I used to think we were immortal," Tommy continued quietly. "But then I realized, maybe we were. Not in body, but in spirit." A hush settled over the room. Some wiped tears, others smiled through them. Memories floated through the air, the crash of waves, the roar of engines, the crackling voice of the producer in their earpieces during live broadcasts. The world had once watched them with admiration and envy. They had been the dreamers who went where few dared. But fame, like everything else, had faded. The Globo channel that once celebrated their adventures had been replaced by digital platforms and younger faces chasing their own kind of glory. Linda walked to the back of the hall, where a projector had been set up. With a trembling hand, she turned it on. The room filled with the sound of flickering film and faint music from another era. Old footage flashed onto the wall, the Globo Hunters in their prime. They were scaling cliffs, diving into mysterious caves, flying across jungles and rusted plains. The colors were faded, but the energy radiated like lightning. Gasps filled the room as they watched their younger selves, fearless, untamed, burning with life. "Look at us," said Rosa Delgado, her voice cracking. "We thought the world was endless back then." She held on to her necklace, one shaped like a small compass, the same one she'd worn on every expedition. "We didn't realize time was the one journey we couldn't control." Hank walked up beside her and